Good evening, everyone. I'm PJ O'Neill, serving as Branch Chief for STEM Training. Good evening, everyone. I'm PJ O'Neill, serving as Branch Chief, STEM Training and Youth Programs. Welcome to this month's Tech Talk, Understanding Nautical Charts with Lieutenant Commander Doig from NOAA's Marine Chart Division. Tech Talks are sponsored by the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary, and the Boy Scouts of America Sea Scout program. I'll be coordinating your questions after the presentation, but feel free to post questions in the chat at any time. Tech Talks are held on the fourth Tuesday of the month at 2100 Eastern Time. Next month's Tech Talk is on April 25th, a pathway for earning an FAA drone pilot's license. Just a reminder, this Tech Talk is being recorded and will be posted on the Sea Scout and Aux Scout YouTube channels. The recorded Tech Talks make excellent training materials with your shipmates in your Sea Scout ship or your auxiliary flotilla. They are free, available anytime, so please share the word if you think a shipmate has missed out on the Tech Talk tonight and would be interested. I would like to turn the program over to Branch Assistant Hiram Ascabi to introduce our subject matter expert, Commander Doig, a commissioned officer in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Hiram?
Thank you, PJ. Really appreciating. Good evening, everyone. It's a great honor for me to introduce a fellow colleague from NOAA, Lieutenant Commander Doig of the NOAA Corps. Take it away, Commander.
All right. Good evening, Sea Scouts. As they said, my name is Mike Doig, and I work for NOAA's Marine Chart Division. And I'm going to take you guys through understanding nautical charts, what they display, where that information comes from, and some resources for you to use to find out a little bit more about nautical charts. Just as a little bit of background, the Marine Chart Division within NOAA falls under the Office of Coast Survey, and the Office of Coast Survey was founded when President Thomas Jefferson signed an order establishing the Coast Survey in 1807, and he was interested in getting the shoreline and the seas of the U.S. charted for shipping, for military information, for making sure that our land interests were being recorded, and other sorts of things, those same sorts of issues that drive our mission today. Within the Office of Coast Survey, there's four divisions. There's the Marine Chart Division, which is where I work. There's the Hydrographic Surveys Division, Navigation Services Division, and the Coast Survey Development Lab. I'll touch on a little bit of those other three, but the Marine Chart Division is the primary focus of today's talk. Most of the employees that work within the Marine Chart Division are cartographers, physical scientists, or IT specialists. So what do we do in the Marine Chart Division? There's two kind of areas that we focus on. One of them are the products that we create. We go out and we collect data on a wide range of natural phenomena and environmental information, tides and currents, surveying the seafloor, all of those other things. We take that information and we develop products using that data, and then we distribute it out to the public, mostly free of charge in almost all instances. There's also services. We have navigation response that I'll talk a little bit about, regional support, technology research, and we also develop models. A lot of the things that we use for forecasting are based on those models, and they really help us to understand what's going on in the world. So where do we survey? NOAA surveys in U.S. waters, the shoreline, and creates nautical charts out to about 200 nautical miles, which is considered the U.S. EEZ. Often, when you think of the U.S., you just think of the continental U.S., but we have areas like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We have a lot of area in Alaska, as you can see. And then there's lots of territories and other areas in the Pacific that also get charted as well. So our products span the globe. Why do we chart all of these areas? Primarily, it's for commercial shipping, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but it also supports everything from commercial fishing, recreational boaters, the cruise industry, ferries, all of those vessels that take cars from mainland to island communities and other sorts of things. All of this totals a large chunk of our national economy. So these products are really, really important for these things. Back in the 1970s, container ships carried about 1,700 TEUs, which is a 20-foot equivalent, commonly known as a shipping container. And they only drafted about 9 meters or so. They weren't very, very deep. Over time, these ships have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And as you can see, through the 80s, through the 2000s, they've gotten closer and closer and closer to the bottom. There's a lot of work across the country right now for expanding the channels in a lot of different ports to accommodate these much larger ships. I know that Miami's been expanded recently, Houston is being expanded, Los Angeles. I mean, almost every major port is trying to accommodate these ships because they bring so much cargo and so many things that drive our economy into these ports every year. This number here, 1.5 trillion, is a little bit outdated at this point. From my understanding, they're closing in on $3 trillion of cargo that are coming in and out of US ports every year by 2030. So it's a very, very important piece of our economy. So just to kind of take a step back, one of the things that I think most of us are familiar with, I mean, you guys are Sea Scouts, so hopefully you have a little bit of maritime experience, but I think everybody's familiar with being in a car. And there's a lot of cues that I think people almost kind of instinctively understand about being in a car. When you're driving, you're looking at the lines on the road. The lines on the road tell you where to stay in your lane, right? Like which direction to travel. When you're looking at the lights on the other vehicles, white lights on another car tells you that it's coming towards you. Red lights on a vehicle can tell you that it's going in the same direction as you. You have all sorts of instruments in front of you, and you might even have a GPS unit in front of you, but there's a lot of other things. I'm sure if you took a minute to kind of think about it, you could start to come up with a list of things. Probably something like a stop sign, right? If you saw a stop sign, you would know what the stop sign is. If you saw a traffic cone, you would know that there was something to be concerned about ahead, maybe some construction or a pothole or a stopped vehicle. You'd see traffic lights. They tell you whether to stop or go. Railroad crossing, it's a similar idea as a stop sign, but it's a different shape, it's a different color, and it gives you different information. Speed limit sign telling you, how fast you're allowed to travel. And then you might get a traffic alert as well. There's many ways that comes across. You might get it across your radio. You might get a notification on your GPS unit. You might get, if you're watching TV ahead of time. And all of that kind of filters into these modern tools now where you have something like Waze or Google Maps or something else that is feeding you all of this information in a centralized location. And all of it ends up, kind of almost live streaming where you can see traffic backups and all those other sorts of things on these products. Well, when you're on a ship, you might have very similar things, but they're in a little bit different forms. And so one of the things that you might be very familiar with are lighthouses. And lighthouses can tell you how far offshore you are. They can tell you your location, any number of things that you can use a lighthouse for. You can take a fix on it. Range markers can give you information, much like the lines on a road. It can tell you where you're at in a channel as you're navigating in and out of port. Things like marker buoys that give you information about your speed. Buoys that are a specific color tell you information about which side of the buoy to be on, and it's got a specific shape, a specific color, and it's numbered. Day mark symbols or other things. So just like on land, you have a map, at sea, you have these nautical charts. And you can also have, the colors of lights as well, just like on vehicles, are very important. Red being port, green being starboard, etc. So what is a nautical chart? I'm sure that many of you have seen a chart similar to this here. They're called, frequently referred to as paper charts or raster charts. Fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, depending on your viewpoint, all of these raster charts will be sunsetted in 2025. So they will no longer be produced or updated after that point. There are many charts now that have already been sunsetted at this point and put into last edition or completely canceled at this point. The new products that are going to be taking over for those are called ENCs, or electronic nautical charts. And they look similar to this. Just like a map in a car, that's a static piece of information, it's only as good as the last time it was updated. These electronic products are much easier to apply updates to and get that update out to the mariners very quickly, so you can get a lot of information. But similar to a map, there's a lot of information, and you might not know what all of it is. I'll show you how to use an online viewer for this so that you can click through. But one of the things that you'll need if you want to understand a nautical chart is something called chart number 1. You can get this online. You can download it if you just Google chart number 1. It basically walks you through what all of the symbols, abbreviations, and terms on nautical charts are. So if you come across a symbol or something on a nautical chart and you're not sure what it is, or you want a little bit more information about what it means, you can go to chart 1, and it's kind of like the answer book to nautical charts. So what we have here is a little bit of land and sea off the coast of Connecticut. And as you can see on the land side, kind of the Google Maps perspective, you can see that the land has roads identified, it's got parks identified, a lot of some of the important landmarks are identified. But when you look at the ocean, it's very, very generalized. It's just a blue blob. It doesn't really give you any information. On the nautical chart perspective, it's the exact opposite of that. If you look on this side, the land is very generalized. It just has a few kind of, landmarks and city names. But then when you look to the ocean, you see that it's got depths, it's got buoys that indicate a channel. It's got other buoys offshore here, other things that might indicate where you can fish or where there might be obstructions, etc. So nautical charts are essentially the inverse of a map. When you're looking at nautical charts, there's kind of a few main ideas that you want to consider. One of them primarily being depth. If you remember back to the example of the container ships, your Boston whaler that you take out on the weekend might have a draft of 3 feet or something, maybe even less than that. It's very, very shallow draft. So you can pretty much go most places that there's water. But if you're in a ship that has a 50-foot draft or more, you're very concerned about where that vessel can navigate. If you look here in this small chartlet over here, you can see that some of the depths, 83 feet, 85 feet, 78 feet, that ship could navigate safely, but very, very, very rapidly, because these contours are very tight together, you get into something called a shoal. And shoaling water is very dangerous for big ships. You definitely do not want to run into shoal water. Other areas, other things that you can generalize in terms of water depths is if you're anywhere near the continental shelf, it generally gets deeper very slowly and kind of a gradual progression as you get out towards the continental slope. Once you get offshore and out into open waters, it drops off very rapidly. So if you were navigating out in the open ocean, chances of you running aground are very, very, very slight. But if you're anywhere near shore or up on the continental shelf, you're definitely much more concerned as a mariner about what's underneath your vessel or around your vessel for that matter. Another thing that you're looking at is feature detection. So you're concerned about what sorts of things might be on the seafloor. Is there a shipwreck down there? Are there lobster pots I might run into? Lobster pots in general aren't put on a nautical chart, but fishermen typically will set their pots along these contour lines because they like to follow the contours when they set them. So a lot of times, if you start to come across a contour, you'll look for those the buoys that indicate that there's lobster pots. People that are very concerned about some of the things on the bottom, again, might be fishermen. Recreational fishermen might be out there looking for stuff. People that scuba dive might be out there looking for a specific wreck or other types of things. But knowing what's on the bottom can be very important. I sailed a lot when I was down in the Gulf of Mexico, and there's all sorts of infrastructure that supports the oil and gas industry down there in the Gulf of Mexico. And knowing when we're doing fisheries surveys down there, knowing whether or not there's pipelines that we might get tangled up on or might disrupt is very important for us. Another thing that we're interested in is bottom characteristics. So what sort of bottom do you find down there? When we go and do surveys, we actually take, it's called a bottom grab. We send down this clamp that actually grabs a piece of the bottom and brings it up so we can find out if it's mud or shells. And you can see M and SH stands for mud and shells. RKY is for a rocky bottom. And then if you look over here, it's HM for hard mud. And again, you can find all of these abbreviations and what they mean in that chart one. Knowing what the seafloor is made of, again, can help fishermen know where to set their gear, where to trawl. It can also tell you if, will you damage your boat if you hit the bottom? Ideally, you never run aground, but if you do run aground, you want to run aground in, mud or something soft, not rocks. Rocks are never good to have contact the bottom of your vessel. So where does all this information that we put on the nautical charts come from? Historically, what they would do is something called lead lining. They would go out and they would attach, it's a piece of lead about so big, onto a line, and they would drop it down to the bottom and see when the line stopped moving, and they would take a measurement and then put that on the chart. And as you can see, it's just a cookie crumb trail of information. The data is very sparse. It's not a very dense way to survey. It gives you just a generalized picture of what the bottom looks like. Over time, they finally came out with single beam surveying, kind of like a old time flashlight with a single bulb. It doesn't illuminate very much. You can see it's a lot better than lead line. It connects all of the dots. It fills in all the information between that, but it doesn't give you a full picture of what the seafloor looks like. There's still a lot of gaps in the data. Today's modern standards use something called multibeam, which is basically taking a lot of these single beam sensors and spreading them out in an array so that you can get a much better, more high resolution picture of the seafloor. For every every line that you survey, you're getting much, much more information. And if you look here where the green line is, you're completely missing this entire mountain range or these peaks down on the seafloor that you're getting with this multi-beam data. The goal is to have the entire seafloor mapped in this multi-beam data at some point in the future. These are a few more examples of what that looks like. This is a multi-beam echo sounder data and an example of what a shipwreck looks like. You can tell by the colors, the depth of the water. It kind of shows what the beam looks like coming off the bottom of the vessel. Another tool that we use, and sometimes we use them together, is a side scan sonar. This is called a towfish, and it's launched off the back of a vessel and towed behind. And this is what the data that comes to the vessel looks like from a side scan sonar. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a shadow on this side of that image. Both of these are very high resolution. I've seen everything. Sometimes when we're doing side scan sonar, you can see things like sea turtles and sharks and other sorts of cool things in the data when it comes back to the ship. And the way that we collect this is they call it mowing the lawn. You basically, if you picture sort of a baseball diamond where they have that perfect grass cuts where they have the lines going back and forth, that's what you do in the ship. You just drive back and forth and back and forth, and you just paint the seafloor and collect that information. NOAA has 4 hydrographic survey vessels in our fleet that we send out to get this information, and they gather roughly 50% of the square nautical miles surveyed each year. OMAO is another line office within NOAA. It's the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, and they're the ones that basically manage all of these vessels. We have the Rainier, which is home ported in Newport, Oregon, but they're out in the Pacific doing some really great work out amongst those islands that I was showing earlier. The Fairweather is home ported in Ketchikan, and they primarily survey up in Alaska. We have the Thomas Jefferson that's out of Norfolk, and they do a lot of surveying work on the East Coast. And then the mighty Ferdinand Hassler is home ported in Newcastle, New Hampshire. I was the executive officer on this vessel. Very unique vessel. It's a swath vessel, so it's almost like a giant catamaran. It's got echo sounders on each hull, and we tow a towfish behind it. And this thing is a survey machine. It can collect a lot of data very rapidly. Another place that we get information or data to put on the charts is from the Navigation Services Division, which, if you remember, was one of the divisions in the Office of Coast Survey. The navigation response teams, if you notice, most of them are located on the East Coast, are rapid response teams that basically go out and they can survey ports and channels and other things to help reopen them after something like a hurricane or some sort of major storm comes through, and it might shift the bottom or sink things or move buoys out of position or other things. So having an ability to go out there and rapidly survey these ports to get them back open, to get supplies and other things flowing back into these areas are very important. So after these storms, these navigation response teams go out and get that information. And if there are any major changes, we update the charts accordingly. Another kind of future development is these uncrewed systems, much like drones that fly around to, collect information on land. We have these uncrewed systems that are being developed and deployed and are almost certainly going to be the future of this sort of work, where you just kind of drop it in the water, let it do its thing. It's pre-programmed to go survey some area, and then you pick it back up out of the water and download the data off of it and charge it back up and do it all over again. I think that these are going to be a really important step in the future of surveying. After we get all that data, after they go out and they survey and they get all that information, it goes into a computer that basically a physical scientist will go through the information, they'll process it, they'll package it up, they'll make sure that it's to the correct standards. They'll write something called a descriptive report that'll describe the conditions under which the survey was conducted. And after some time, it can take weeks to months, they'll package that up and they'll send it to one of our hydrographic branches, who will then send it to the Marine Chart Division. Once we get that data, we can use that to update the nautical charts and then get that out to the public. In this example, a lot of times our surveys don't have like massive changes. It'll just be subtle differences. Maybe a lighthouse has been decommissioned or something like that, or a buoy is removed. But in this instance, you can see that there's a completely new channel that's been added here in Anaheim Bay. So they added a completely new channel, and if you were navigating in this area, getting that on the chart as quickly as possible would be very important to you. There's all sorts of new infrastructure that's going in along the Mississippi River and down in the Gulf and other things that can completely change a chart, much like this example. So we try to prioritize these as much as possible so that, again, the people that are working in these areas have accurate charts to navigate on. And once we have those updates applied, we get them out to the public. The way that we do that typically is we put it on our website. It's available for free to download, and you can use any number of ways to actually look at these products. There's an online viewer that you can use, or there's something called OpenCPN, which is a free, open source tool that you can use to look at chart products. So there's any number of ways that you can kind of go through. And you can see on this vessel here, they have an ECDIS right in the middle of this console, and that's where they're using these ENC products to navigate with. Very, very cool stuff. This is what the NOAA ENC Viewer looks like. I'll demonstrate this here in a minute. It's an ENC viewer that provides a continuous depiction of all NOAA ENC coverage over US coastal waters in the Great Lakes, as it would be shown on an electronic chart display and information system, or an ECDIS. US chart number 1, which we talked about earlier, provides information about the symbology used in ECDIS. Again, so if you want to understand these products, get yourself a copy of chart 1, or I'll show you a quick shortcut here in a minute that you can use to kind of go through and look at these things. All sorts of great information available in this view. If you're more inclined to like the Raster products, or you want to just create your own Raster products, NOAA has a new tool out called the NOAA Custom Chart version. NOAA Custom Chart Viewer. The NOAA Custom Chart Viewer, it's now in a version 2.1. I guess this is an older image, but it basically allows you to go in and select an area that you're interested in, set the scale, and then you can output a PDF version of almost any nautical chart that you want across the US. You can see all of the red lines are essentially existing nautical charts, and the custom chart viewer allows you to select almost anywhere without staying within these red lines. I'll show you that in a minute as well. This is another part of the new version of the custom chart tool, where it allows you to create a catalog of charts that you can then export over time. So if you happen to be in an area that you sail a lot, or you have a place that you repeatedly use those products, you're able to save them and then export them if you're going to go out. Just a quick opportunity to plug some student opportunities. I know that you guys may be going to college soon, and I wanted to tell you about some of NOAA's undergraduate opportunities that might help you in the future. They stretch across all of NOAA's work, so everything from weather, climate, the fisheries world, satellites, charting, sanctuaries, all of these different areas have opportunities for students. The programs can vary from a couple of weeks to an entire year or more. And some of them, if you get in, can make it easier to get hired into a federal position in the future. These are a few of the opportunities. Some of the folks that I know have gotten Hollings scholarships. There's the EPP and MSI undergraduate scholarship program, and others as well. I know that the National Weather Service also has a student internship program as well. So there's lots of opportunities if this sort of world interests you and you want to know more about it. That is all that I have for the PowerPoint part of my presentation. If you do have more information, or you want any other questions beyond the Q&A at the end of this presentation, here's my email address, or you can use the QR code. But I am going to shift real quick. Let me see if I can escape out of this and go here. I think this is the chart viewer. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. So you can go online, and if you type in ENC Viewer for NOAA, it should bring you to one of these sites. Waiting for this to load. Try and reload it real quick and see if I can get it to work for you. So let's just go somewhere down here in the Gulf. that's where I tend to work. So what you can do is it's essentially our full catalog of nautical charts. And if you wanted to take a look and see what all of these different things are, you can take a look at all of the different features. And you can use chart 1 to basically determine what some of these areas are. You can figure out some of them if you're familiar with charts, like where anchorages are. A lot of these purple or magenta areas are that infrastructure I was talking about, where the pipelines are that lead to these offshore oil platforms. But if you wanted to know more about them, you can click on this eye over here on the left that says identify. And there's 2 different types of identify tool, but the point identify will allow you to click on different features within the ENC. And it'll give you information. It'll tell you that this feature is a light. It gives you a little bit more information about how it was compiled. And if you click through these, tabs, it'll give you more information about those features on the chart. You can click on more information and it'll tell you like the color of the light, if it's flashing or not. If you remember earlier, all of those different things mean different things to mariners. You can find out the Skaman, which is the scale minimum, all sorts of other things in here. If you click through here, you can turn different layers on and off, and you can see all sorts of other options that are available in the settings. Lots of things, the intended usage. You can restrict your scale bands to the different types of scale. Do you want like a small scale or a large scale chart? You can turn on all of the different label contours. You can label safety contours, all sorts of other features that are in there. If you have a vessel that you're on that you know the draft of, you can go in and set your safety contours as well, so that like the chart basically is customized to your vessel, so you know where that vessel can go and where that vessel can't go. There's a lot of different things that you can go in here. You can turn compass roses on and off, etc. A lot of really cool features in here. Trying to think of any other, interesting features within here. It's just one of those things you can kind of poke around and sort of see what there is. You can change the base map. So this is an ESRI product. So if you didn't like the traditional ENC, you can go through and change what the base maps look like. And ruler tool will allow you to measure distances and other things. And then the other website that I wanted to show you guys real quick, get this out of the way, is the NOAA custom chart tool that allows you to go in and create something that looks more like those traditional raster charts. So if we go somewhere on the East Coast, this down here, so you can see each of these red lines indicates a current nautical chart, and it tells you the scale of it. There's 40,000 scale chart, 80,000, et cetera, et cetera. So if we wanted to create a chart, what you can do is you can go to this box up here and you can create a chart. Let me just zoom in a little bit more. We'll call it, let's just call it Charleston Harbor. Charleston Harbor. And say, I'll just leave it at 25,000. We want to keep it in portrait, but you can change it to landscape. And then you can create new chart. And you click here. And so it'll create a 25,000 scale chart right where we clicked. And let's just kind of move it around. We want to move this to a new location. You can kind of click to have it there. And then, as I showed before, it added it to your chart queue, and you can also open a chart catalog viewer. But you have to select export selected charts. It takes about 2 minutes or so for it to export. And what it'll export is a PDF of this area that we selected. That PDF can be used for any number of things. You could have it on an iPad that is able to show you PDFs. You could get it printed if you wanted to pay somebody to print it out. If you had a large format printer at home or at school or somewhere else, you could also have it printed out that way. You could hang it on your wall or just study it if you were so inclined. But some people just prefer the way that these raster products look. The cool thing about these, the custom charts, is that they do pull from the same database that the ENCs are pulling from. But again, the product is only as up to date as the time that you basically export this cell. So when you export it, it's kind of locked in time with its updates, whereas the ENC is continually updated as time goes on. So if you did want to use these again in the future, you could either correct them in the old school way where you take out your erasers and whiteout and other things to try and update it, or you would need to come back and reprint out a fresh set of charts so that they're updated. I know that some folks like to have these as backups on their vessels, so they might go through and update them, maybe once a year or something, just to have a set around, but they're not relying on them all the time. But they are good to still have around and good to still practice on and other things. So we're a little over 50% of the way to the export. Hopefully it'll export here soon and I'll be able to show you what that looks like. Let's see.
Commander, while we're waiting, we did have a relevant question. As you mentioned, you'd be able to print out the raster style chart if you had access to a large format printer. So this is a specific measurement, if you know this off the top of your head. If I have a 36-inch wide HP printer, could I produce the chart from the new viewer?
You can, yeah, and you would be able to set the output of the product because it is a PDF, so you could make it fit. Which, then again, though, part of the struggle with this is if you do shrink it down, you got to make sure that it doesn't do anything to the scale of the chart as well.
Okay, distortion or
any sort of distortion. There are a few vendors that will be listed on our website that you can actually get these printed from that will do them to the current standard. So this is what the chart would look like if you printed it or exported this yourself. It looks very much like the old style raster chart, something you might be familiar with, but it also gives you an opportunity, if you printed it out, to be able to practice with dividers or other sorts of techniques to basically practice navigation. Yeah, it's very, very similar. It gives you down here, it'll tell you the generation date. So it'll give you tells you when you created the product. It gives you information on the scale and everything. And then it also has all of the the text notes that are typically found on nautical charts, whereas more modern charts don't necessarily have these quite so obvious as the old paper charts did. But they are listed here on these additional pages beyond just the chart itself. So it gives information about weather broadcasts, caution areas, submerged pipelines, and all sorts of other things that might be important to a mariner navigating in these areas. Another interesting thing, and this kind of relates back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the lead line versus a single beam versus a multi-beam. There's something called a CATZOC, or a zone of confidence diagram, and this is attached to all of the charts that you can find. And what it does is it basically tells you, like it's like a letter grade, right? Like an A1, A2, B, C, D, or U. And so it basically, if you have an A1, you're up to date in terms of modern chart standards, multi-beam, and the information that's in that, you can see it's down here in this section, is like the best data that we currently have. A2 is slightly less good So it's, this kind of purpley area that's through there. So it looks like most of the data in this port are pretty up to date. But as you go further down the scale, a lot of times that relates to going from multi-beam to single beam, and then sometimes even very, very old, like lead line survey type stuff. Not in a major port like Charleston, but somewhere offshore or in very remote areas. Sometimes the information that we have is literally from like Captain Cook's voyages and other things that are very, very historically, it's old data and it's not very reliable to today's standards. So something to be aware of if you're, looking at a nautical chart and you want to know a little bit about what kind of went into making that chart, you can kind of assess how good the quality of the data is on that chart. Yeah, I think that's more or less everything that I have, unless there are some more specific questions that you guys have received.
Okay, well, if there are any follow-up questions, please enter them into the chat. One question, are the NOAA charts that we were looking at tonight, are those systems integrated into popular chart plotter units like a Garmin or a Simrad? So am I getting NOAA's data when I turn on, say, my Garmin for chart plotter?
Yes. So companies like Garmin and Simrad, I can't speak specifically to your individual product, but a lot of companies will resell. They take the data that we collect, the data that we're putting out, they repackage it and do some value added things to it to make it work for their systems. But most of our products are freely available. And again, I don't know if your individual unit will be able to take them, but most systems can use the ENC data, freely. But yeah, most of it is our data that comes from us. There are not too many survey fleets out there. It's quite expensive to run a survey fleet.
Fantastic. And related, when we look at the ENC data, so you explained a little bit, the best data and how that is color coded. When we see, say, depths on the chart, are all those hard measured, or does NOAA use any kind of estimation or extrapolation in different areas?
Yeah, so typically when you're doing a multi-beam survey, you are getting very accurate information that is not necessary to be rounded. But for instance, in the Mississippi River, the Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for surveying the Mississippi River, and they use single beam surveys. So if you remember, that single beam doesn't give you a full picture all the time. So a lot of times when we do the updates, we do have to interpolate between those surveys to be able to get a full picture of the river bottom. So in general, I would say that they are fairly accurate, or very accurate. But in other areas, there is a need to interpolate that data to basically fill in the gaps.
Fantastic. Well, I don't see any other questions. I would like to thank you very much, Lieutenant Commander Doig, for joining us tonight. Oh, wait, we do have a question. Okay, last minute. When creating a custom chart, does the product always overlay a compass rose and latitude scale along the edge? Thank you.
Both of those options are, if you go into the settings before you export the chart, you can turn the compass rose on and off. And I'm not sure if you can turn the Latin long grid off, but I think you would be able to, but it would almost make it pointless to have it because you kind of need that to basically use it as a navigation product. I know recently we got rid of, there was a warning on the first generation of these that said not for navigation, but I believe all of these are now certified for navigation to be used as a navigational aid. So I don't know if you'd be able to turn the latitude and longitude off, because then it would be unusable essentially.
All right, any other questions?
Well, and if you don't, you know, if you play around with those tools, either the ENC Viewer or the custom chart tool, and you run into any issues, feel free to email me. I don't know if the slides will be available, but you can get the QR code off the video and send me a question, and I'd be happy to answer for you. And if you guys have any feedback as well, like some of these tools, that custom chart tool is a very new tool, and so I know the folks that have that are currently developing it are looking for feedback from folks that are using it to find out you know, how to improve it and if there's any bugs or anything else. I know the pilots and other commercial mariners are very keyed in on these things, and if there's anything wrong with them, we hear from them very rapidly. So it'd be interesting to hear what your guys' experience is with it.
Another question, where can we get charts that are outside of NOAA's responsibility?
It's a good question. It depends on what area of the world, but probably the biggest manufacturer of charts in the world is the UK. They make charts all over the world, but there's hydrographic offices all across the world. So it just depends on where you're navigating. You would reach out to them. A lot of people, one of the cool things about the US charts is that they're freely available, but say you were navigating in Canadian waters, you can find their products as well, but they typically charge for them. So you would need to pay for both the electronic and paper versions. But there are companies as well that will do, like if you were planning a voyage around the world on your custom, you know, on your private yacht, they will custom generate a set of charts and other things that you can take with you on your voyage. So I know when we were going down into the Caribbean, there was a few areas that were outside of US waters, and we needed to get some charts made, and we had somebody just put together a package of the cells that we needed, and they sent it to us, and away we went. They were all UK charts.
Fantastic. If you do think of a question later after the presentation is over, Lieutenant Commander Doig has graciously offered his email and a QR code. And so you can visit the Sea Scout YouTube channel or Aux Scout YouTube channel and fast forward to the part with his email address or QR code. So that's very helpful. Another question did come in. Will all raster charts be archived for future download?
Yes, yeah, there will be a way to look at the raster charts in the future, but I do not know if they will be publicly available per se. I think, again, if you're just looking at historical charts, I think that there will be a way to look at those. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but they're not just going to throw them in the trash and you know, never have them again. A lot of our cartographers really, even though we're going fully digital, they still like to look at the raster charts because they just are so data rich in a single view. They just provide so much information that a lot of times they'll compare what they're doing to this, or to make sure that place names, like that's one of the things I think that raster charts does a lot better than an ENC chart, is provide place names. And so making sure that that's consistent between those things. But there'll definitely be a way to find those raster charts in the future if you wanted to look at them for a historical purpose. But if you were looking for products to, you know, take out on your sailboat for the weekend, I would highly recommend the custom chart tool.
What does it take to be a cartographer?
That's a good question. I think a lot of the cartographers that come through us are typically have a math or a physics or some sort of engineering background. There's a lot of math and other aspects to this field that are you know, there, but the University of Maryland has a really good cartography program. And I know that there's a few other universities that have programs designed for this. GIS is another kind of emerging area that a lot of cartographers have certificates or master's degrees in GIS. Almost everything that I showed you guys tonight is built off of the ESRI kind of backbone. So ArcGIS is an ArcPro, which is coming out as the next generation of GIS tools, are very, very heavily used in our world. So that's what we create all of our charts on, is ArcGIS, and that's what gets sent out for those products. So if you're interested in being a cartographer, I would highly recommend some coursework in both math and also GIS.
So you referenced GIS and ESRI. Could you just explain the acronyms for us?
Sure. GIS, I'm sorry. ESRI is a company out of California. It's like Earth Sciences Research Institute, I think is what ESRI stands for. Forgive me if that's not correct. But they are the creators of ArcMap and a lot of GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems. So basically all of this ability to take data and put it into a map. So if you're familiar with like the presidential elections, where they're able to kind of take data across the US and say, this state is this, and this state is that, and this state is this, that's kind of the basic form of this GIS. So in our world, we tend to map like where, the depths are and where different sorts of infrastructure is and things like that. A lot of that information is useful in all sorts of things. In a previous stint that I had within NOAA, I was part of a oil spill response team. And a lot of what we were mapping had to do with natural resources. So we were looking at things like where birds nest and where, there's very important beaches. So if you had an oil spill, like what would your number one priority area to protect be? And so finding ways to map that information into a visual way is a very powerful tool to help decision makers make decisions very rapidly. And so these tools, this GIS and other tools that are available, are very powerful ways to kind of A, make a case for something, and B, help people make decisions. Because especially in the oil spill world, people are very, there's a very tight timeline to be able to respond to these things before bad things happen. So being able to present that stuff in a easy to digest form helps them make those decisions quickly.
Another quick question. Can you give a brief summary of what is the NOAA Corps?
Sure. So there are, everybody's familiar with, the five primary: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Air Force. Did I miss one?
Coast Guard.
Then there's the newly created Space Force, and then there are two uniformed services. So if you've ever heard of the Surgeon General is the head of the Public Health Service, and they also wear similar uniforms to the blue ODUs. And then the NOAA Corps is under the Department of Commerce. There's roughly 321 officers. We do not have any enlisted personnel. There's a new expansion of the NOAA Corps to 500. I don't know if we'll ever get that big, but we've been authorized through the NOAA Corps Reauthorization Act to expand to 500. All of us are operational specialists, so we all either sail or fly planes. The hurricane hunters are probably the best known NOAA officers. They fly in the P3 Orions into the eyes of hurricanes. They also do surveys. So a lot of like our shoreline that gets updated on our nautical charts comes from aerial surveys. So those get flown in the Twin Otter aircraft. They'll go out and do coastline surveys. The King Air goes out and does coastline surveys. There's a few aircraft that have LiDAR, which is a high resolution mapping technology that gets really good information about our shorelines. And so the air side does that, and then the sea side either works in kind of one of two tracks. There's the hydro track, which is where I'm currently at. So the hydrography group, we create the nautical charts and go out and survey. And then there's the fisheries side, which goes out and does fish surveys. The first two vessels that I was on were fisheries vessels. And we would do, after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, we went out and we did some really interesting deep sea trawling to look for evidence of the dispersants and oil and other things and all kinds of really interesting fish that you trawl up from thousands of meters down. And the other vessel that I was on, called the Gordon Gunner, did marine mammal surveys. So we would go out and look for all sorts of interesting whales, dolphins, and all sorts of stuff. Got an opportunity to get very close to right whales, which most people don't get a chance to do, and found, well, I didn't find, I just happened to be on the cruise that found a new species of whale in the Gulf of Mexico called the Rice's whale. So that was an exciting trip. The scientists were very, very excited to find this species of whale. Then when we're not on ships or flying aircraft, we rotate to land assignments. And it's pretty much a 2-year at sea or a 5-year flying. And then you do about 3 years in an office. And I've been everywhere from Miami to Cleveland to here just outside of DC is where I'm at now in Silver Spring, Maryland. So you kind of get an opportunity to see the country and do some really cool things.
Fantastic. Well, that looks like the end of the questions for now. And so again, as I mentioned before, visit the recording after it's posted in a few days. If you do have further questions, if you didn't catch Lieutenant Commander Doig's email or scan the QR code. We'd like to thank you, Lieutenant Commander, for joining us tonight for a wonderful presentation, rich in information, and for thoroughly answering all of these questions that came in. Great job. We're really happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. Good luck, Sea Scouts, and yeah.
All
Hope
right.
to see you guys in our fleet soon.
Excellent. And I hope that you in the audience, you will join us on April 25th for our April Tech Talk, the pathway to an FAA drone pilot's license. Have a good night, everyone.